The autumn rain lashed against the carriage windows as Lady Eleanor Dunwich tapped her gloved fingers impatiently on her knee. "I remind you, Lucinda, that your prospects are severely limited. At 23, you are perilously close to spinsterhood." Lucinda Sutton stared out at the dreary Derbyshire landscape, the rolling moors shrouded in mist. Her aunt's words were merely the latest variation of a lecture she had endured since her 18th birthday. "Aunt Eleanor, I am quite content with my situation. Father left enough for me to live modestly, and I have my books and charitable work." Lady Eleanor's face puckered with displeasure. "Your father, God rest his soul, left you with barely enough to maintain appearances. And now that your sister has married well, it is time you did the same." The carriage slowed as they approached Thornfield village, where Lady Eleanor's childhood friend, Mrs. Martha Pennington, resided. Their annual visit was typically a fortnight of forced socialization with eligible gentlemen from neighboring estates, none of whom had captured Lucinda's interest. "I have arranged something special this year," Lady Eleanor announced with a triumphant smile. "Mrs. Pennington has secured us an invitation to Morewick Hall." Lucinda's head turned sharply from the window. "Morewick? But that is the residence of Baron Morewick, yes. And before you protest, I am well aware of his reputation. Baron Vincent Morewick may be a recluse, but he is unmarried and possessed of £15,000 a year. And rumoured to be mad," Lucinda countered. "They say he hasn't appeared in society for nearly a decade." "Rumours," Lady Eleanor dismissed with a wave. "The man lost his parents tragically and suffered some misfortune in London. It is hardly surprising he prefers the quiet of country life." Lucinda fell silent, knowing argument was futile. The carriage rolled into Thornfield, the quaint cottages and shops offering a welcome respite from the dreary journey. As they passed the village square, a commotion caught her attention. A crowd had gathered around what appeared to be an overturned cart. "Driver, stop a moment," Lucinda called, peering through the rain-streaked glass. "Really, Lucinda," her aunt protested as the carriage halted. "Whatever it is, it does not concern us." But Lucinda was already reaching for the door handle. "Someone may be hurt." Before Lady Eleanor could object further, Lucinda had descended into the drizzle. A cart laden with produce had indeed overturned, spilling vegetables across the muddy square. An elderly man was attempting to salvage what he could while simultaneously calming a distressed horse. "Sir, are you injured?" Lucinda asked, approaching him. The old man looked up, his weathered face creased with worry. "No, miss, but my livelihood is. These vegetables were bound for market in Derby tomorrow." Without hesitation, Lucinda gathered her skirts and began collecting the scattered produce. A few villagers joined her, but many merely watched, whispering among themselves. "Miss!" A deep voice cut through the patter of rain. "You'll ruin your dress." Lucinda turned to find a tall figure approaching, his features obscured by the brim of his hat and the high collar of his greatcoat. Something in his bearing, the straight shoulders, the measured stride, marked him as gentry despite his unadorned attire. "It's only mud, sir," she replied, continuing her task. "This man's need is greater than my concern for fashion." The stranger knelt beside her, his large hands efficiently gathering potatoes and placing them in her basket. His face remained partially hidden, but she glimpsed a strong jawline and the shadow of what might have been a scar across his right cheek. "You're not from the village," he stated rather than asked, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "I am visiting with my aunt. We're staying with Mrs. Pennington." "Ah." The single syllable carried a wealth of understanding. Another London miss brought to hunt the local bachelors. Lucinda felt her cheeks warm despite the chill. "I assure you, sir, I have no interest in such pursuits." "A fortunate disposition," he replied, as Thornfield offers little in that regard. Together they managed to salvage most of the old man's produce, reloading it onto the righted cart. The stranger pressed something into the vendor's hand. From the man's profuse thanks, Lucinda surmised it was money. "Miss Sutton!" Lady Eleanor's sharp call carried across the square. "Return to the carriage immediately." Lucinda sighed, brushing ineffectually at her mud-spattered dress. "I must go." Thank you for your assistance, Mr. But the stranger had already melted away into the crowd, leaving her curiously bereft. Upon her return to the carriage, Lady Eleanor was aghast. Look at the state of you. What will Mrs. Pennington think? And what of Baron Morewick if we should encounter him? I doubt very much that the Baron concerns himself with the state of visitors' hemlines, Lucinda replied, settling back into her seat. Besides, from all accounts, he rarely receives visitors at all. Which is precisely why our invitation is such a coup, her aunt insisted. Mrs. Pennington's son Philip treats the Baron occasionally. He is a physician, you know, and has managed to secure us an invitation to view the conservatory. Apparently, it is quite remarkable. Lucinda's interest was piqued despite herself. I had not heard that Morewick Hall contained a conservatory of note. The late Baron was an avid botanist. The current Lord Morewick maintains it in his father's memory, they say. Lady Eleanor adjusted her bonnet with a self-satisfied air. We are to visit the day after tomorrow. Mrs. Pennington's welcome was as effusive as ever, her elegant townhouse a hive of activity as she prepared for an evening gathering to honour her London guests. My dear Lucinda, how you've bloomed, the silver-haired widow exclaimed, embracing her. Though perhaps a bit too sun-kissed for current fashion. No matter, we shall have you looking presentable for the Baron. Mrs. Pennington, Lucinda began carefully, I understand your son has professional dealings with Baron Morewick. Is there any truth to the rumours about his temperament? The older woman's expression grew serious. Philip is bound by professional confidence, of course, but I can tell you that Lord Morewick is neither mad nor monstrous. He is merely private, and scarred, both figuratively and literally, by events of the past. Scarred? Lucinda echoed, thinking of the stranger in the village. An accident some years ago, though some say it was no accident at all. But come, you must rest before dinner. Several eligible gentlemen will be joining us, including my Philip, who has recently ended his engagement to Miss Taylor. That evening, Lucinda found herself seated beside Dr. Philip Pennington, a serious young man with intelligent eyes and precise manners. Throughout dinner, she attempted to guide the conversation toward the subject of Morewick Hall and its reclusive master. The Baron maintains his privacy for good reason, Dr. Pennington said finally, lowering his voice. London society was not kind to him after his misfortune. What nature of misfortune? Lucinda pressed. The doctor hesitated. It is not my place to say, but I will tell you this, Vincent Morewick is a better man than most who denounce him. He employs half the village, supports the local school, and never turns away those in need, though he prefers his generosity to remain anonymous. Later, as the evening wore on, Lucinda found herself by the window, watching raindrops trace silver patterns on the glass. The drawing-room buzzed with conversation, none of which held her interest. Her thoughts kept returning to the mysterious stranger who had helped in the village square. Contemplating escape. A familiar deep voice startled her from her reverie. She turned to find the very man who had occupied her thoughts standing before her, no longer concealed by rain and hat brim. Her breath caught. He was younger than she had imagined, perhaps 30, with striking features that might have been handsome were it not for the jagged scar that ran from his right temple down his cheek. You, she managed. Vincent Morewick, he introduced himself with the barest hint of a bow. I believe we shared a muddy encounter earlier today. Lucinda felt heat rise to her face. Lord Morewick. I had no idea, precisely why I did not introduce myself, he interrupted, his grey eyes assessing her. People behave differently when they know who I am. I imagine they do, she replied, recovering her composure. Though I would have thanked you properly regardless of your title. A hint of a smile touched his lips. Unlike your aunt, who has been watching us with poorly disguised calculation since I approached you. Lucinda glanced across the room to find Lady Eleanor indeed observing them with hawkish intensity. I apologize for her. She believes it her duty to see me suitably matched. And I am suitable. His tone was sardonic. According to my aunt, 15,000 a year makes any man suitable, regardless of temperament or inclination. Lord Morewick's expression darkened. Is that what you believe as well, Miss Sutton? On the contrary, Lucinda replied honestly, I believe compatibility of mind and character far outweighs material considerations. A refreshingly unfashionable view. He studied her for a moment longer. Will you still be visiting Morewick Hall tomorrow? Yes, if the invitation stands. It does. The conservatory is at its best in autumn. He glanced toward Lady Eleanor, who was now making her way determinedly in their direction. Until tomorrow, Miss Sutton. With that, he slipped away, leaving Lucinda to face her aunt's torrent of questions and admonishments. The following morning brought clearing skies and renewed lectures from Lady Eleanor on proper behaviour. Remember, this may be our only opportunity to make an impression on Lord Morewick. You must be demure yet engaging, intelligent but not opinionated. Lucinda, absorbed in a book she had discovered in Mrs. Pennington's library about rare flora, merely nodded. Her aunt's instructions faded to background noise as she read about species that bloomed once in a decade, plants that mimicked insects, and flowers that changed color with the soil's composition. The journey to Morewick Hall took them through dense woodland before the imposing structure came into view. It was a grand manor of grey stone, its Gothic architecture softened by ivy and surrounded by immaculately maintained grounds. Not the forbidding fortress of village gossip, but a stately home of considerable charm. A taciturn butler admitted them, conducting their party, which included the Penningtons, through a series of elegant rooms. Lucinda noted that while everything was well maintained, there was a stillness to the house, as though it waited for something or someone to breathe life back into it. The conservatory, the butler announced, opening a set of double doors. Lucinda stepped into another world. The vast glass structure housed a riot of colour and fragrance, orchids in impossible hues, towering palms, delicate ferns, and flowers she had never seen outside of botanical illustrations. Water trickled from a central fountain adorned with classical figures, and small birds darted among the foliage. Remarkable, is it not? Lord Morewick stood beside a flowering vine with crimson blossoms, watching her reaction. Today he was dressed more formally in a dark frock coat that emphasized the breadth of his shoulders. It's extraordinary, Lucinda breathed, forgetting propriety in her wonder. I've never seen anything like it. My father began collecting specimens after his travels in India, he explained, approaching her. I've continued his work, though I lack his expertise. You're too modest, Dr. Pennington interjected. Lord Morewick has added significantly to the collection, particularly the medicinal specimens. Lady Eleanor, meanwhile, had manoeuvred herself to Lord Morewick's side. How clever of you to maintain such a treasure. It must require considerable attention. Indeed, he replied without looking at her, his gaze remaining on Lucinda. Miss Sutton, I understand from your conversation yesterday that you appreciate botany. Would you care to see some of our rarer specimens? Before Lady Eleanor could object, Lucinda accepted, and soon found herself separated from the others, following Lord Morewick deeper into the conservatory. Your aunt will be displeased, he observed as they paused before a plant with delicate blue flowers. She clearly intended to accompany us. My aunt is often displeased, Lucinda replied with a small smile. But I couldn't refuse the opportunity to see. She gestured to the plant. Is this a Himalayan blue poppy? I was just reading about them this morning. Surprise flickered across his features. It is. My father brought the seeds back decades ago. They are notoriously difficult to cultivate. Yet they thrive here, Lucinda noted. You must have inherited his gift. Not his gift. Merely his stubbornness. Lord Morewick's tone softened. Some things refuse to flourish despite all care, while others bloom against all odds. They continued through the conservatory, their conversation flowing naturally from botany to literature to philosophy. Lucinda found herself speaking more freely than she ever had with any gentleman of her acquaintance. You have an unusual mind, Miss Sutton, Lord Morewick remarked as they circled back toward the others. You think before you speak, and when you do speak, it is worth hearing. You flatter me, my lord, she replied, though pleased by his assessment. I do not flatter, he said firmly. It is a skill I never acquired, even before. He gestured vaguely toward his scarred face. Lucinda hesitated, then gathered her courage. "May I ask what happened?" For a moment, she thought he might refuse to answer or rebuke her for her boldness. Instead, he said quietly, "A fire. In London. I was trapped attempting to help others escape." His eyes took on a distant look. "Not everyone survived." "I'm sorry," she said simply. "As am I." He seemed about to say more when Lady Eleanor's voice rang out, calling for Lucinda. "Your warden summons you," Lord Morewick said, his momentary openness vanishing behind a mask of polite detachment. As they rejoined the group, Lucinda noticed Lady Eleanor's barely concealed frustration, which manifested in clipped tones and pointed remarks about proper behavior. Mrs. Pennington, perhaps sensing the tension, suggested they view the portrait gallery before departing. The gallery revealed generations of Morewicks, stern-faced men, and composed women in formal poses. At the end hung a portrait of a young man without the scar, his expression confident and eyes unclouded by whatever shadows now haunted them. "That was commissioned for my 30th birthday," Lord Morewick said quietly, having appeared at her side once more. 3 months before the fire. Lucinda studied the painting, noting the differences between the man before her and his former self. "You seem changed beyond the physical mark. Perceptive of you." His voice held a note of surprise. "Yes, the fire changed more than my appearance. It altered how the world saw me, and how I saw the world." "Is that why you left London?" A bitter smile touched his lips. "I left London because London made it clear I was no longer welcome. A scarred face is forgivable, a scarred reputation is not." Before Lucinda could inquire further, their time at Morewick Hall drew to a close. As they prepared to depart, Lord Morewick approached her once more. "Miss Sutton, there is to be a small gathering at the Hall next week, a harvest celebration for the estate workers. It's not a society event, but perhaps you might find it of interest." "I would be delighted," she replied, ignoring her aunt's wide-eyed stare. "Until then." He bowed over her hand, his touch lingering just a moment longer than strictly proper. On the journey back to the Penningtons, Lady Eleanor could scarcely contain her excitement. "Well done, Lucinda. I had my doubts after your muddy display in the village, but clearly, it made an impression. Baron Morewick singled you out most particularly." "He was merely being polite, Aunt," Lucinda protested, though her heart beat a little faster at the memory of their conversations. "Nonsense. I know when a gentleman shows interest, and Lord Morewick is definitely interested." Lady Eleanor's eyes gleamed with calculation. "We must ensure you have a new gown for this harvest celebration. Something modest yet flattering." The week that followed brought a flurry of activity as Lady Eleanor orchestrated what she clearly viewed as a courtship campaign. Lucinda submitted to fittings for a new dress and endured endless advice on how to secure Lord Morewick's affections. Meanwhile, she found herself drawn to the village, where she spent time at the small lending library and local school. It was during one such visit that she encountered the elderly cart vendor, now recovered from his mishap. "Miss Sutton," he called as she exited the schoolhouse. "I've been hoping to see you again. I wanted to thank you properly for your help." "It was nothing, Mr. Timmins, Miss George Timmins." He doffed his cap. "And it wasn't nothing to me. Between your help and Lord Morewick's generosity, I managed to salvage enough for market." "Lord Morewick seems well regarded here," Lucinda observed, falling into step beside the old man as he walked toward the village centre. "Aye, though it wasn't always so," Mr. Timmins replied. "When he first returned from London, folks were wary. All those rumours about the fire and the young woman who died." Lucinda's steps faltered. "A woman died in the fire." Mr. Timmins glanced around before continuing in a lower voice. "Miss Harriet Vance, daughter of Viscount Calder. She and Lord Morewick were betrothed, they say. The gossips claimed he started the fire in a jealous rage when she tried to break the engagement." "That's absurd," Lucinda protested. "He was injured trying to save people." "That's what those of us who know him believe," the old man agreed. But London society believed the worst, and her father made sure the rumours spread. Lord Morewick could have fought the accusations, but instead, he retreated here. Why would he not defend himself? Some say it was grief, he loved her truly, despite what happened. Others think he protects someone else. All I know is he's been a good master to this village, whatever his past. This revelation weighed on Lucinda's mind as the day of the harvest celebration arrived. The new dress, a modest gown of deep green silk that complemented her chestnut hair, hung ready, but her thoughts were troubled. "You seem distracted," Lady Eleanor noted as they prepared to depart. "I hope you're not developing a headache. This evening is crucial." "I'm quite well," Lucinda assured her, though in truth, she felt a growing unease. What if the rumours held some grain of truth? What if Lord Morewick harboured darker secrets than he had revealed? Morewick Hall was transformed for the celebration. Lanterns illuminated the gardens, and tables laden with harvest bounty stretched across the terrace. Estate workers and villagers mingled with the handful of gentry invited, creating an atmosphere unlike any society event Lucinda had attended. Lord Morewick found her shortly after their arrival, his expression warming at the sight of her. "Miss Sutton. I'm pleased you could come." "As am I," she replied, studying his face for any sign of the man described in the rumours. She saw only the now familiar features, the intelligent eyes, the scar that he made no attempt to conceal. He offered his arm. "Would you walk with me? There's something I'd like to show you." They strolled away from the festivities toward a secluded part of the garden where a small stone monument stood, partially concealed by ivy. Lord Morewick brushed aside the foliage to reveal an inscription, in memory of Harriet Vance and those lost. "May they find peace." Lucinda's breath caught. "You've heard the rumours, then," he said quietly. "Some of them," she admitted. "I didn't know if I should believe them." "Most shouldn't be believed," he replied, his voice tight with an emotion she couldn't quite identify. "But some contain kernels of truth. Harriet and I were betrothed. She did die in the fire. I was there." "What really happened?" Lucinda asked softly. Lord Morewick was silent for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the memorial. "Harriet had ended our engagement, not because of any jealousy or discord, but because she had fallen in love with my cousin, Edward. I was disappointed but not enraged. I wish them well." He paused, his jaw working. "The fire started in Edward's lodgings during a small gathering. I was there because, despite everything, Edward was still my closest friend. When the flames spread, I helped people escape. Edward and I went back for Harriet, who had been resting upstairs. The staircase collapsed before we could reach her." Lucinda reached out instinctively, placing her hand on his arm. "How terrible for all of you. Edward was killed instantly. I was pulled from the rubble, badly burned." His voice had grown flat, as though reciting facts from a great distance. "When I recovered consciousness days later, I learned that Viscount Calder, mad with grief, had accused me of starting the fire deliberately out of jealousy. But that's monstrous. Surely there was an investigation." "There was. No evidence of arson was found, but by then, the damage to my reputation was done. Whispers followed me everywhere. Former friends crossed the street to avoid me. Even those who didn't believe I was a murderer found my scarred appearance disturbing." His lips twisted in a bitter smile. "I retreated here, where at least the villagers judge me by my actions rather than by gossip or appearance." "Why maintain this monument?" Lucinda asked. "Why not try to forget?" "Because forgetting dishonors their memory," he replied simply. "And because I bear a responsibility, if not guilt. Had I been more attentive to Harriet's happiness sooner, had I noticed her feelings for Edward earlier, perhaps things would have unfolded differently." Lucinda felt a surge of admiration for this man who bore both visible and invisible scars with such dignity. "You cannot blame yourself for what was beyond your control. A lesson I am still learning, Miss Sutton." He turned to face her fully. "I've told you this because I find myself drawn to your company in a way I had not expected. But I would not have you ignorant of the shadows that follow me." "I appreciate your honesty," Lucinda said, her heart beating rapidly. "And I find myself similarly drawn to you." His expression softened, hope kindling in his eyes. Then perhaps, a commotion from the direction of the house interrupted whatever he had been about to say. They turned to see a carriage arriving, its occupant descending with the imperious air of someone accustomed to command. "Calder," Lord Morewick muttered, his body tensing. "What is he doing here?" They hurried back toward the gathering, where indeed Viscount Calder, a stern-faced man with iron-grey hair, was creating a stir among the guests. "Morewick," the Viscount called, his voice carrying across the terrace. "Still hiding in the countryside, I see. Still pretending to be the benevolent lord while my daughter lies cold in her grave." Lord Morewick approached him calmly, though Lucinda could see the tension in the set of his shoulders. "Lord Calder, this is hardly the appropriate venue for such a discussion." "There is no appropriate venue for what I have to say to you," Calder spat. 7 years, and not a day passes that I don't curse your name." Dr. Pennington stepped forward. "My lord, perhaps we should continue this conversation inside." "I have no desire for privacy," Calder declared, his gaze sweeping the now silent gathering. "Let all hear that Vincent Morewick is responsible for my daughter's death. Let them know he has never paid for his crime." "There was no crime," Lord Morewick responded evenly. "Only tragedy. One that I mourn as deeply as you do." "Liar!" Calder's face contorted with rage. "You killed her as surely as if you had set the flame to her dress yourself. And now I find you hosting celebrations, courting new victims." His gaze fell on Lucinda, standing nearby. "Does this young lady know what became of your last intended?" Lady Eleanor appeared at Lucinda's side, gripping her arm. "We should leave," she whispered urgently. "This is most improper." But Lucinda stood firm. "No, aunt. I wish to stay." Lord Morewick's expression had hardened. "Say what you will about me, Calder, but do not drag others into your vendetta. Miss Sutton is a guest, nothing more." "Is that so?" The Viscount's tone was skeptical. "Then perhaps she should know that just yesterday, I received this." He withdrew a letter from his coat. "From Edward's former valet, who has been abroad these many years. He witnessed something the night of the fire, a quarrel between you and Edward." "A quarrel about Harriet?" A murmur ran through the crowd. Lord Morewick's face had gone pale beneath his scar. "There was a quarrel," he acknowledged quietly. "But not what you think. Edward was confessing their attachment to me. Asking for my blessing. And you gave it willingly." Calder's laugh was harsh. "A man notorious for his pride and temper? I think not. I think you raged, and in your rage, you knocked over the lamp that started the fire." For the first time, Lord Morewick's composure cracked. "You think I would harm Edward? He was like a brother to me. Yet he lies dead alongside my daughter, while you live on, scarred but breathing." Calder's voice shook with emotion. "The valet's letter confirms what I've always suspected. You may have convinced these simple folk of your innocence, but London society knows better." Lord Morewick seemed about to respond when a quiet voice cut through the tension. "I believe I can clarify matters." All heads turned toward Mrs. Pennington, who had stepped forward, her dignified bearing commanding attention despite her small stature. "Mrs. Pennington," Lord Calder acknowledged with a curt nod. "This doesn't concern you." "On the contrary," she replied calmly. "It concerns everyone who values truth over conjecture. You see, I was there that night." A shocked silence fell over the gathering. Even Lord Morewick stared at her in disbelief. "I had come to London to visit my late husband's solicitor," Mrs. Pennington continued. "I was staying at the same lodging house as Edward. When the fire broke out, it was Lord Morewick who helped me to safety before going back for others." "This proves nothing," Calder objected. "Perhaps not, but this might." Mrs. Pennington withdrew a folded paper from her reticule. "A letter from your daughter, written the very day of the fire. She entrusted it to me to deliver to you, but in the chaos that followed, and with your grief-stricken accusations against Lord Morewick, I deemed it wiser to wait." Calder snatched the letter, his hands trembling as he unfolded it. The crowd watched in tense silence as he read, his expression shifting from anger to confusion to profound grief. "She writes of her love for Edward," he said finally, his voice breaking. "Of Morewick's gracious acceptance of their attachment. Of her happiness on the eve of what should have been a new beginning." The letter fell from his fingers. Lucinda, standing closest, impulsively retrieved it, handing it back to him with gentle reverence. "Thank you, miss," he murmured, suddenly seeming older and diminished. He turned to Lord Morewick, something like shame crossing his features. "It seems I have done you a great injustice." Lord Morewick's response was quiet but firm. "We have both lived with grief, Calder. Perhaps now we can both find some measure of peace." The tension dissipated gradually as Lord Calder, after a brief, private conversation with Lord Morewick, departed. The gathering resumed, though subdued by the evening's revelations. Lucinda found herself alone with Lord Morewick once more, this time in the quiet of the library where they had retreated for a moment's respite from curious eyes. "You stayed," he said simply. "When Calder made his accusations, you stayed." "Of course I stayed," Lucinda replied. "I know enough of your character to judge for myself." He took her hand, his touch gentle despite his strength. "Lucinda, may I call you Lucinda? Few people have shown such faith in me. Fewer still have seen past the scar and the rumors to the man beneath." "Perhaps they never took the time to truly look," she suggested, her heart racing at his use of her given name. "Or perhaps it takes a special kind of sight." His eyes held hers. "From the moment you knelt in the mud to help old Timmins, I saw something rare in you, compassion without pity, strength without hardness. I've grown to admire you greatly in our brief acquaintance." "And I you," Lucinda admitted. "Your resilience, your kindness despite what you've endured, it speaks to a character of uncommon worth." He stepped closer, still holding her hand. "This is perhaps too sudden, too soon after tonight's events, but I must speak. I find myself falling in love with you, Lucinda Sutton. I had thought such feelings lost to me forever, yet here they are, undeniable and overwhelming." Lucinda felt tears prick her eyes. "It is not too sudden. Not when it feels as though I've known your heart far longer than these few meetings." "Then may I hope?" His voice was hushed, vulnerable in a way she had not heard before. "May I court you properly, with the intention of making you my wife?" "Yes," she whispered, her free hand reaching up to touch his scarred cheek. "Yes, with all my heart." He drew her close, his lips finding hers in a kiss that spoke of promises and healing, of a future neither had dared to imagine until now. When Lady Eleanor discovered them thus, her initial scandalized gasp quickly transformed into poorly concealed delight at the prospect of her niece becoming a baroness. Mrs. Pennington merely smiled knowingly, as though she had anticipated this outcome all along. The autumn that began with a muddy encounter in a village square concluded with an intimate wedding in the Morewick Hall chapel. The conservatory provided rare blooms for Lucinda's bouquet, and among the guests sat a subdued but reconciled Viscount Calder. As Vincent and Lucinda Morewick departed amid the cheers of villagers and servants, the late afternoon sun broke through the clouds, illuminating the newly restored east wing of the hall, soon to house a school for village children, the first of many projects the couple planned together. "Are you happy, my love?" Vincent asked as their carriage rolled down the drive. Lucinda looked back at the hall, no longer a lonely fortress but a home reawakened. "Completely. Though I suspect the gossips of London will be disappointed to learn that the reclusive Baron has found his match in a village mud-splattered nobody." "Not nobody," he corrected, drawing her close. "The woman who saw worth where others saw only scars. The woman who brought light back into Morewick Hall, and into my heart." As the carriage carried them toward their future, Lucinda reflected that sometimes the greatest treasures lay hidden behind imposing facades, waiting only for someone with the courage to look deeper and discover the true worth within.